The weight of chains. October 15th, 1857. The bell rang before dawn, as it always did, its iron voice cutting through the gray morning mist that clung to the quarters like a shroud. Isaiah had not slept. How could he? With Thomas's scream still echoing in his mind, with the image of that whip rising and falling burned into his memory. He rose from his pallet, his body stiff and aching from another night on hard wood covered by a thin blanket. Around him, the other men in the cramped cabin stirred, groaning as they pulled themselves from sleep into another day of labor. No one spoke. What was there to say? Isaiah pulled on his rough cotton shirt and trousers, both worn thin from years of use and washing. His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, reviewing every detail of their escape route for the 1000th time. After what happened to Thomas, he couldn't afford a single mistake. "You look like death," Moses said quietly, appearing at Isaiah's shoulder. The blacksmith's massive frame filled the narrow space between the pallets. "You need to sleep, brother. Can't think straight if you don't sleep." "Can't sleep if you can't stop thinking," Isaiah replied, keeping his voice low. The other men were filing out toward the yard where Silas Crow would assign the day's work. "Thomas, I know." Moses's dark eyes were grave. "But we ain't Thomas. We've been planning for 2 years. We ain't running blind." Isaiah nodded, but the cold knot of fear in his stomach didn't loosen. 2 years of preparation could still end in failure. One wrong step, one betrayal, one moment of bad luck, that's all it would take. They stepped out into the cool morning air. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, streaks of pale gold threading through the gray. The quarters spread out around them, rows of identical wooden cabins, each housing 8 to 10 souls. Smoke rose from a few chimneys where women were already preparing the morning meal of cornmeal mush. Children too young for field work played in the dirt between the buildings, their laughter a strange counterpoint to the grimness of their surroundings. Isaiah's eyes found Hannah immediately. She stood near the well with Abigail, both women carrying water buckets. Hannah wore the better clothing afforded to house servants, a simple but clean calico dress, her hair wrapped in a neat cloth. When she saw him, something flickered in her eyes. Worry, love, fear. He gave her the smallest nod. Not here. Not now. They couldn't risk being seen together too often, couldn't give anyone reason to suspect the connection between them. "Field hands!" Silas Crow's voice boomed across the yard. The overseer stood on the porch of his cabin, which sat between the quarters and the big house, a physical manifestation of his role as enforcer, neither enslaved nor master, but something in between. "Y'all know your assignments. Cotton ain't gonna pick itself. And if any of you thinking about following Thomas's example," he gestured toward the punishment cell, a small wooden structure with a barred door. "Well, you seen what happens to runners." Isaiah kept his face carefully blank as he joined the line of men heading toward the cotton fields. The crop was nearly ready for harvest, the bolls bursting white against the brown stalks. Another few weeks, and they'd be in the thick of it. 16-hour days, fingers bleeding from the sharp edges of the bowls, backs screaming from bending and reaching. And then, when the harvest was done and the cotton pressed and shipped, when the plantation's attention turned to other tasks, that's when they would run. But first, they had to survive until then. Hannah climbed the back stairs to the big house, her footsteps light on the wooden steps. She carried Mrs. Bellmont's breakfast tray, tea, toast with butter and preserves, soft-boiled eggs. The china clinked gently as she walked, and she steadied the tray with practiced ease. The big house was a different world from the quarters. Here, the floors were polished wood covered with imported carpets. The walls were papered in delicate patterns, hung with oil paintings of Bellmont ancestors. The furniture was dark mahogany, upholstered in rich fabrics. Everything spoke of wealth, built on the backs of those who lived in the cabins beyond the formal gardens. Hannah had learned to move through this world like a ghost, present but invisible, always watching, always listening. Mrs. Bellmont treated her house servants as extensions of the furniture, speaking freely in front of them as if they had no ears, no minds, no ability to understand or remember what they heard. That carelessness had given Hannah information that might save their lives. She knocked softly on the bedroom door. Enter. Constance Bellmont sat at her dressing table, still in her nightgown and wrapper. She was a handsome woman, her face carefully maintained with creams and powders, her dark hair threaded with silver. She looked up as Hannah entered, her pale blue eyes sharp and assessing. "You're late," she said, though the clock on the mantel showed Hannah was precisely on time as always. "No, ma'am," Hannah said quietly, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "Same time as every morning." Constance's lips thinned. She disliked being contradicted, even when she was wrong. "Don't be impertinent, and when you've finished here, I need you to air out my winter dresses. The Colonel says we'll be going to Charleston next month for the season." Hannah's heart jumped. Charleston. That meant the family would be away from the plantation for weeks, possibly months. The Colonel always left Silas Crow in charge during such absences, but the overseer couldn't be everywhere at once. It might create opportunities. "Yes, ma'am," she said, beginning the familiar routine of helping Mrs. Bellmont dress for the day. As she worked, Constance kept up a steady stream of commentary. Complaints about the servants, gossip about neighboring plantations, worries about her daughter's marriage prospects. Hannah listened to it all with half her attention while her mind raced with this new information. Charleston, next month, that might align perfectly with their plans. "That boy who ran," Constance said suddenly, watching Hannah's reflection in the mirror as she fastened the buttons on the back of her dress. "Thomas, you knew him, didn't you?" Hannah's hands didn't falter, though her pulse quickened. "Yes, ma'am. We all knew Thomas." "Foolish creature." Constance shook her head. "The Colonel provides for all of you, food, shelter, clothing, medical care. And still, some of you are so ungrateful. Where did he think he would go? How did he think he would survive out there in the world alone?" Hannah said nothing. There was no safe answer to such questions. "You wouldn't be so foolish, would you, Hannah?" Constance turned to look at her directly. "You have a good position here. You're well treated. You understand how fortunate you are, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am," Hannah said, meeting those pale eyes steadily. Inside, she was screaming. Fortunate. As if being owned was good fortune. As if having no rights, no freedom, no claim to your own body or labor was something to be grateful for. But she kept her face serene, her voice respectful, because that's what survival required. Constance studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. You're a sensible girl. I would hate to lose you. It's so difficult to train a new lady's maid." She turned back to the mirror, and Hannah resumed her work. But she could feel Constance's suspicion like a weight on her shoulders. The mistress was watching her more carefully now, and that was dangerous. They would have to be even more careful. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cotton fields. Isaiah's shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands moving in the rhythm he'd learned as a boy. Reach, grab, pull, drop in the sack. Reach, grab, pull, drop. The cotton sack dragged behind him, growing heavier with each row he completed. Samuel worked 2 rows over, the 16-year-old moving with the quick energy of youth. His sister Elijah was farther down the field with the women and older children. Isaiah could hear singing, one of the work songs that made the hours pass faster, that let them communicate in code beneath the simple lyrics. "Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Water. Cross water to throw off the dogs." The song was a reminder, a lesson, a map encoded in melody. Moses worked nearby, his massive hands making quick work of the cotton bolls. He caught Isaiah's eye and tilted his head slightly toward the edge of the field where Silas Crow sat on horseback. Watching the workers with his ever-present rifle across his saddle, Isaiah understood. The overseer had been more vigilant since Thomas's capture. He was watching for any sign of restlessness, any hint of others planning to run. They would have to be patient. The bell rang for the midday meal. 30 minutes to eat the cornbread and salt pork that had been brought to the field. Isaiah found a spot of shade beneath a live oak and sat, his body grateful for the brief rest. Samuel and Elijah joined him, the siblings sitting close together as they always did. "You hear what happened to Thomas?" Samuel asked quietly, his young face hard with anger. "They gonna sell him to a trader heading to Mississippi." Isaiah's stomach clenched. Mississippi. The deep South, where conditions were even more brutal than here, where enslaved people were worked to death in the cotton fields and replaced with fresh purchases. It was a death sentence, just a slower one than hanging. "Where'd you hear that?" Moses asked, keeping his voice low. "Kitchen girl heard Mrs. Bellmont telling the colonel this morning," Elijah said. Her voice was soft, but her dark eyes were fierce. "Said they can't keep a runner. Sets a bad example. Better to sell him off and be done with it." Isaiah closed his eyes. Poor Thomas. He'd only wanted what they all wanted, freedom. But his timing had been wrong, his planning inadequate. And now he would pay for it with the rest of his life. "We ain't gonna end up like that," Samuel said fiercely. "When we go, we gonna make it." "Hush," Moses said sharply, glancing around. "You want someone to hear you?" Samuel fell silent, but his jaw was set in stubborn determination. Isaiah understood that anger, that impatience. He'd felt it himself at 16. But anger without discipline was dangerous. "We wait," Isaiah said quietly. "We stick to the plan. We don't let what happened to Thomas make us reckless." "How long we gotta wait?" Samuel demanded. "Another month? 2 months? What if they decide to sell me and Elijah before then? What if they split us up?" "They won't," Isaiah said, though he couldn't be certain. Enslaved people were sold all the time, families torn apart at an owner's whim. "The colonel's been talking about building up his workforce, not selling off. We're safe for now." "For now," Samuel repeated bitterly. The bell rang again, signaling the end of the meal break. They rose and returned to the fields, to the endless rows of cotton beneath the burning sun. Isaiah's hands moved automatically, but his mind was racing. Samuel's anger was understandable, but it was also dangerous. If the boy did something rash, if he let his impatience push him into a mistake, it could doom them all. Isaiah would have to talk to him. Soon. Before that anger became action. The meeting place was the same as always. The old tobacco barn at the far edge of the property, long abandoned since the colonel had switched to cotton as his primary crop. The building was half collapsed, its roof open to the stars, but the shadows inside were deep enough to hide them. Isaiah arrived first, as he always did, slipping through the darkness like smoke. He'd learned long ago how to move silently, how to avoid the paths that Silas Crow's patrols followed. The other members of their group had learned the same skills. Moses came next, then Mercy, the old woman moving slowly but steadily. Abigail arrived with little Ruth sleeping against her shoulder. The child was exhausted from a day of playing while her mother worked in the big house kitchen. Samuel and Elijah came together as always. Hannah was last. She'd had to wait until the Bellmonts retired for the night, until she was certain Mrs. Bellmont wouldn't call for her again. When they were all gathered, Isaiah looked around the circle of faces barely visible in the starlight filtering through the broken roof. 7 people, 7 souls gambling everything on a desperate hope. "We got news," Isaiah said quietly. "The family's going to Charleston next month for the season. They'll be gone for weeks, maybe months." He saw understanding dawn on their faces. This was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. "How long we got?" Moses asked. "Month, maybe 5 weeks," Hannah said. "Mrs. Bellmont's already having me prepare her winter clothes." "That's perfect," Mercy said, her thin voice sharp with intelligence. "Harvest'll be done, weather'll be turning cool, better for traveling at night, and with the family gone, there'll be less attention on the quarters." "We need to finalize everything," Isaiah said. "Routes, supplies, contacts, no more delays. When we go for good." "What about Thomas?" Elijah asked softly. "They're selling him to Mississippi." Silence fell over the group. They all knew what that meant. "We can't save him," Isaiah said, though the words hurt. "If we try, we risk everything. Thomas made his choice and he paid for it. We have to learn from his mistake, not repeat it." "That's cold," Samuel said, his voice tight with anger. "That's survival," Moses countered. "Isaiah's right. We can't save everyone. We can only save ourselves." "And if we make it," Hannah added, reaching out to touch Samuel's arm, "if we get free, we can help others. We can be part of the railroad, help more people escape. But first we have to survive." Samuel nodded reluctantly, but Isaiah could see the struggle in the boy's face. That anger, that righteousness, it would either fuel his determination or destroy him. "Next meeting, we review the full plan," Isaiah said. "Every detail, every contingency. We got one chance at this. We can't afford to fail." They nodded, one by one. As they began to slip away into the darkness, returning to their cabins by different routes, Hannah lingered. "Walk with me," she whispered. They moved together through the shadows, not touching but close enough that Isaiah could feel her warmth. When they reached a spot deep in the trees where the darkness was nearly complete, she stopped. "I'm scared," she said simply. Isaiah took her hand, feeling the smoothness of her palm against his work-roughened skin. "I know. I am too. What if something goes wrong? What if we end up like Thomas?" "Then we end up like Thomas," Isaiah said. "But at least we tried. At least we fought for our freedom instead of just accepting this." He gestured back toward the plantation, invisible in the darkness but ever present. "I'd rather die free than live in chains." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "When we get to Canada, I want to marry you, legal and proper, with papers and everything." Isaiah felt his throat tighten. "I want that too, more than anything." "Promise me," she said fiercely. "Promise me we'll make it. Promise me we'll get married and have a real life, not this half-life they give us here." He wanted to promise. He wanted to tell her they would definitely make it, that everything would work out. But he'd never lied to Hannah, and he wouldn't start now. "I promise I'll fight for it," he said instead. "I promise I'll do everything in my power to get us there. That's all I can promise." She nodded, understanding. Then she kissed him, quick and fierce, before slipping away into the darkness. Isaiah stood alone for a moment, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, a distant owl, the whisper of wind through the pines. Somewhere in the big house, the Bellmonts slept in their comfortable beds, never thinking about the people they owned, the lives they controlled. But those people were thinking, planning, preparing, and soon, very soon, they would be gone. Isaiah turned and made his way back to the quarters, his mind already working through the final details of their escape. 4 weeks, maybe 5, and then they would step into the unknown, risking everything for a chance at freedom. Behind him, in the punishment cell, Thomas lay in darkness, waiting to be sold away from everything he'd ever known. Ahead of him, somewhere beyond the borders of South Carolina, lay a promised land where a person could own themselves, could make their own choices, could live without chains. Isaiah had spent 2 years preparing for this. He'd learned to read in secret, studied maps and routes, memorized the names and locations of Underground Railroad conductors. He'd gathered supplies bit by bit, flint and steel, a knife, a compass stolen from the big house. He'd taught the others what they needed to know, trained them to move silently and think quickly. Now, finally, the time was approaching. As he lay down on his pallet, surrounded by the snores and restless movements of the other men in the cabin, Isaiah allowed himself to imagine it. Walking down a street in Canada as a free man, Hannah at his side as his legal wife, no one able to claim ownership of their bodies or their labor. The image was so beautiful it hurt, but it was also possible. Difficult, dangerous, but possible, and that possibility was worth any risk.